In this video, I'll be discussing my experience in high school. I'll be talking about the disciplines they had and also the way they treated the students. I went to a high school called Rains Park. It was a very supportive school. A lot of the teachers were very nice. If you needed help, they will always be there for you. They would always make sure they'd find time in their day to try and make sure everyone was getting the right and fair education. They made sure they had things like Saturday schools where they'd do English, maths and science, especially when it came onto exam term. They made sure everyone came every Saturday to focus on things that they struggled with. So it wouldn't be everyone's just doing a normal lesson. It would be focused on what they thought you needed to work more on. They also did this during the week sometimes for certain students. So if certain students were either not meeting their grade or the teachers thought that they could do a lot better, so they could be hitting their target but the teachers see more potential in them, then you would get extra classes as well. When I was doing the Saturday classes, I would say they were so much help. Without them, I don't think I would be where I am today. They definitely helped a lot. I would say that the way everything was disciplined was sometimes wrong. So on a Saturdays, there wouldn't only be classes, but there'd also be detentions. Sometimes they would let you go to the classes instead of staying in the detentions, which made a lot more sense. But at the same time, when they had the detentions where you just sit in a room and do nothing, it felt a lot like a waste of time, especially because students knew that they were running them lessons. You always thought to yourself you could be doing something that was much more worth your time. And sometimes during the detentions, they said that people would have to write out why they were there and what they would do to stop the reason why they were there. The reason why I think this was also not really a good discipline was because some people weren't late on purpose, and sometimes it got to the point where, because they did a system where if you was late 3 times, then you'd have to come on a Saturday and do the detention. And a lot of the people there would be like really good students, and a lot of the teachers would be ask them like, oh, why are you here? And it was really embarrassing for them. Sometimes during the weeks they would have detentions as well, and it would be exactly the same but even worse, because most of the time when students wanted to do their homework, a lot of the teachers would end up saying no, and obviously that caused a bit of friction because students didn't want to be wasting their time just sitting there, and it always ended in like students saying they're going to call their parents to like say, oh, like if they have to be there or not. What else? Also, a lot with the interventions, so we called our extra lessons interventions, I would say they were really smart, because the way they did the groups was you could either choose where you wanted to go. So if there was English, maths and science, you could choose which one you wanted to go to. You wouldn't always have to go to the one that your teacher may say if you feel like you don't want to go to that one. So now I'm going to move on to if you get sent out of a lesson. So in our show, we did a scene. Well, we're doing a scene where a child gets sent out of class to go into isolation. And in my school, they did have an isolation, but it'd be very rare that someone would get sent to it like through class. They would have to do something bad, like really bad in class for someone to get sent there. So for their isolation, it was exactly like the detention, but your teacher from that class would give you work, so you could do the work. But most of the time it was a thing where you're getting sent work which you don't know how to do because you're not in the class to learn it. So it was as good as sitting in a room with nothing to do, I would say. So I feel like for isolation, it's a bit of a waste of someone's time, and also it's not really the smartest punishment for a child, because the only reason why they wouldn't want to go to isolation is because they're bored in isolation, not because they feel like, I don't know, not because they feel like, oh, isolation's taught me that I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. It's more, I just don't want to be in isolation. And if you're going to put a child in isolation, you have to be very smart and strategic with it. So make sure when they're in isolation, they're getting the most of they're getting a lot of things done. So just like on a Saturday when you wrote down why you're there, that to me is quite smart, because it's more of a thing. Instead of you just being there, you're just like, you're bored, you're actually reflecting on the reasons why you are there. But yeah, so I would say sometimes isolation, it depends how a school does it. Sometimes it can be beneficial if you're giving that child work, or maybe even one-to-one, or sometimes even counselling. So at the end of my in the end of year 11, my school did this thing where they gave each child in year 11 a mentor. So say if you're stressed or something's going bad, you can always go to that mentor, and maybe they could even do, if you're in isolation, then your mentor comes and speaks to you about why you're doing this, like, is anything going on at home, like things like that. Because a lot of the time, if a child is being disruptive, it can sometimes be just because they're going through something at home and they probably just need someone to talk to. And then after isolation, they would give us something called a report card. So if you do bad on the report card, then you'd get sent back to isolation. If you do good, then you come out of isolation. Well, you won't have to go back in, which I think is quite good, because that's probably the best thing that they had about the isolation in my school, the report card after, to show that you've actually made progress from being in isolation, instead of, oh, you've gone in isolation, now you're just not in isolation. But I'd say that's all I have to say. As a whole, I'd say being in high school was good for me, only because I was never put in isolation, and I never had to go through all of these disciplinaries. But hearing other people talk about it in my school, it made me realise that it doesn't help to be placed in a classroom where you speak to nobody and you're with other children who are named bad students. So altogether, I would say isolation can be a good idea, but it depends how you go with it, and some things in the education do need to change.